chapter 2, verses 36 to 49. And it's so interesting because, are you ready, Dave?
Yeah, it's going.
Oh, it's going, okay. I thought I heard that noise. It's called Here Today, Gone Tomorrow. In every generation, it seems like in every generation, and we can think back, there's at least one dictator in the world that wishes that he, or thinks that he's going to live forever and always be in charge and rule and reign, as if there's no end to it. The reason for this is that power has a way of corrupting the minds of men. And they can never have enough. I mean, how much power do you need? Well, I need a little bit more than what I've got. Because there's all this stuff I want to do.
And they all become legends in their own mind.
They're legends in their own mind. This is also why the founders of our country wouldn't allow one person to be president of the country for more than 8 years. Because you know that if they could keep on running and they got enough people rounded up to vote for them, that they would become a Hugo Chavez, like in Venezuela before he passed away, and then I can't remember the guy's name now that's the president. But it's the same old thing. They knew the nature of man. God knows the nature of man. When we talk about human nature, we're talking about fallen man's natural tendencies. So I always ask the question, do you have to teach a young child to lie or to cheat or to steal? And of course the answer is no, we don't have to teach them. The natural tendency, if they're pushed into a corner, is they're going to do whatever they can do to keep themselves from being accused. Yeah, even though the chocolate frosting may be all over their mouth, they don't have any idea who got into the cake. I'm sure that King Nebuchadnezzar wished that he could rule forever.
That's what they'd say, right? Oh, king, live forever.
Mm-hmm. Though he knew one day he would die. His father had been not king of Babylon, but king of that particular loose confederation of villages and towns and whatever. And Nebuchadnezzar, there was a Nebuchadnezzar the first, and this one that we're dealing with now is actually Nebuchadnezzar the second. And of course he did. He was when he said off with their head, then the heads rolled, right? Daniel was about to tell the king the meaning of his dream, which is what this is all about, right? He had this dream. And Daniel was wise enough, and that wisdom comes from God, of course, to approach this very powerful king with diplomacy. He began with, this is in verse 37, "You, O king, are the King of kings," which Daniel knew that God is the King of kings, not Nebuchadnezzar. However, flattery opens up a lot of doors. But then he told him from whom he had received this power. So he's saying, you're the King of Kings, but just so you know, you have this power because God has given you, not your gods,
The God.
not Marduk, but the actual one and only living true God. I'm sure that Nebuchadnezzar felt that it was his success was due to the fact that he had a strong army and his great ability to lead and to do whatever. It wasn't, by the way, that Babylon didn't do, or Nebuchadnezzar didn't do some good things for the people in the country. He had a lot of good social issues. So he continues, Daniel continues, the God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory over mankind, the animals, the birds of the air. He's made you ruler over all of those things and all of those. It's verse 38. So this is a great prologue, right? This is a great thing to say to him. You are the King of Kings, but God gave you the power to do this. Actually, God has enabled Nebuchadnezzar for such a time as this to be the leader of the world. And of course, he's abusing that. He's not doing the things God would like him to do. And this is why God gives Nebuchadnezzar this dream to begin with. So Daniel says, you are the head of gold. So on this statue, remember last time we didn't talk about the interpretation, but he told him what his dream was. But then he goes on to interpret more of this. In verse 39, he says, but be aware, after your kingdom, another kingdom will rise that's inferior to you. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole world. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. It will crush and break, and that's verse 40. It will crush and break all the other kingdoms. This kingdom of iron and clay will be a mixture of strength and brittleness. It will be strong and it will last longer than the others, but the rulers will they'll diminish in power and grandeur as they go from the absolute despotism, or being a despot, being a I'm trying to think of another word to use for that, but I mean, if you're a despot, you're the person you're the one. No one is greater than you are. So the government that Nebuchadnezzar has is one where he's large and in charge. He's the one that is absolutely in control of everything. Nothing happens that is against his will. Okay, so that's at one end of the spectrum. So the rulers, as you started at the top of the statue, and the head of gold was Nebuchadnezzar, and as you went down the statue, the kingdoms were diminishing in the power and the grandeur of what started with Nebuchadnezzar. And so you get to the point where at the other end of the spectrum, at the iron and clay, we're talking about the Roman Empire. And it was, in some ways, a democratic government. it had a Roman Senate that represented the people, even though they thought they were better than the people, of course. That's verse 42. So it's as you go down the statute, it diminishes and think of it this way: it starts with gold, and it goes down to silver, and then it goes to bronze. So the metals are getting more and more, or less and less of value, and gets down to iron and clay. The people of this kingdom, the Roman Empire, will be a mixture and will not remain united, just as iron and clay separate. Verse 43. All of this is very interesting, right, from a historical point of view. But Daniel tells the king that during the time of these kingdoms, if all this was Nebuchadnezzar through the Roman Empire, that's very interesting. But that's not all of the interpretation of the dream, right? During the time of these kingdoms, the God of heaven will set up one kingdom that will never be destroyed. In other words, the kingdoms of men will not endure. They will not last, because remember, man, that thou art dust, and unto dust shall return. They're not going to live forever. But God will, verse 44. His kingdom will endure forever. Even when man thinks he's... everybody's got those illusions of grandeur, don't they? They think they're going to... But when I'm elected, I will blah, 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 blah. It is important that all earthly rulers recognize the source of their position and their power. It keeps them humble, the rulers that we have today. And not just this country, but in every country. They have to recognize that if they have a position of power and authority and they can do things, they have to remember what was the source of their power. The source of their power wasn't the party that elected them and pushed them and financed their re-election and so on. It's God. If God doesn't want you to be in that position, you won't be in that position. I don't care how much money you've got. There are people now, by the way, that they would think would, and I'm not talking about the obvious people, but there are people that they're jockeying for position to be the Speaker of the House, to be the in that position within the government where all the ties are broken in the Senate, so forth. In the House, you have a majority leader. You have a minority leader. Unfortunately, most of them will not acknowledge God as their king. They just won't do it. So they're really destined to not achieve what they really could achieve during their short stay. What they could do if they were saying, Lord, you're my king. I'm your servant. Tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. I don't want to do something that will destroy the people. Daniel says that, this verse 45, this is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain. That's kind of the last part of the vision. But not by human hands. A rock is cut out of the mountain, but it's not by human hands that that rock was cut out. This rock broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. In other words, it destroyed the whole statue. It destroyed all of those empires. I don't think that he had a clue. You know, if you're around long enough, you see certainly well, if they live long enough, they'll see that their kingdom does not last. We know that the gold was Babylon, the silver was the Medo-Persian Empire, so it was a split, the Medes and the Persians. The bronze was the Greek Empire, established by Alexander the Great, and the iron legs and feet was the Roman Empire. I wonder what a historian today thinks about when somebody quotes to them about how long ago they knew what these empires. They knew about it long before it ever happened. The great God has shown the king, this is a quote in verse 45, the great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. God is showing him what's going to take place in the future so that, I would guess, so that he will understand. Use your time wisely while you're king, okay? Because you're not always going to be here. And he said, the dream is true and the interpretation is trustworthy, verse 45. The king was so struck by what he had heard that he fell prostrate before Daniel, and he paid him honor. Can you imagine? This is the great Nebuchadnezzar laying face down on the ground to show, really, and it's not Daniel, it's God you should be honoring. The king said in verse 46 and 47, the king said, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries. Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and he lavished gifts on him. I wonder what Nebuchadnezzar really felt about having heard about the dream. It says that he was so struck by what he had heard. Very interesting. And I think I would have done exactly what this is what Nebuchadnezzar did. Verse 48. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon. And he placed him in charge of all the wise men. I would have him be sitting next to me.
Like, you're not leaving me.
I want you to be there. But so here's what Daniel did. This is kind of interesting. Daniel then requested that his 3 friends be appointed administrators over the province of Babylon. Daniel remained at the court. Exactly what I would think would have been the wise thing. Somebody with this godly wisdom. I don't want him off on a road trip somewhere, this huge kingdom. I want him to be right there when I have a question, when I want to run something by him.
Yeah, you
want him.
don't want him mired up in all these details.
Yeah, exactly. So he gets his 3 buddies to do that job. Certainly all 4 of these young men were in great positions to influence the people there, including the exiles from Judah. So remember, just to put all this in perspective, not only were these 4 young men brought to Babylon, but thousands of people from Judah were brought, and they were, if they had some abilities, and if they were craftspeople, if they knew how to work with metal and work with wood and whatever. I mean, he didn't just bring, he didn't bring the old, he didn't bring the feeble, the people that would be better off to stay in Judah and work the vineyards and so forth. He left them there. But the people that were of value to him, he brought them to Babylon. So they're there, and they see. They're certainly got to be aware of what's going on with Daniel and these guys. I think Daniel had more of an impact than what we even think about, because when we think about the Magi traveling from the east to go look for the birthplace of the King of Kings, right? For where Jesus was going to be born. What did they tell King Herod? They said, we followed the star to find the King of the Jews. And they knew this alignment, or this conjunction of 3 stars together that made this big bright star. There was more to this. They weren't there following a pagan god. I think Daniel had a real big impact over the years, because he was there for a long time. He was there long after Nebuchadnezzar passed away and his grandson Belteshazzar took over. You remember the writing on the wall? I remember that story. We'll get to that. But, and then the Medes came in and took them captive. And that was the end of that. And then when Cyrus became the Persian king, became the next.
Daniel was still there.
Daniel was still there. Daniel was still there. God never stopped watching over his own people. He never stopped watching over his children as well, and we're his children. He watches over us. He has plans that we would not understand, probably. Some people say, well, I'm not a gifted speaker, I'm not a gifted singer, I'm not a gifted musician, so I'm just a simple person. Doesn't mean God's not going to use you. Because He's got a place for everybody. So just like if anything, this should help us to understand that if you remain faithful to God, like Daniel and these 3 guys remain faithful to God, then no matter what happens, He's there. He's there. You're not walking down that road alone. Not at all. And sometimes we just have to remind ourselves, because fear has a way of creeping in and making us feel like, oh, we're alone, and what'll happen, and all of this. And we just need to say, I depend on you alone, O Lord. You are my rock. I don't want to be caught without you. I want to be in your court, just like Daniel was in.